Nobody ever looked twice at the girl with the bracelet tray. That was fine. Kate had learned a long time ago that being invisible was its own kind of power. You heard things. You saw things. You existed in the spaces people forgot to guard. She was 22 years old, selling handmade jewelry outside buildings she would never be invited into, raising her sick younger brother on whatever she could make before the street lights came on. She wasn't looking for a story. But some nights find you whether you're ready or not. And on a rainy Tuesday outside the Han River Financial District, Kate overheard 4 words spoken in her late mother's language, words spoken by men who assumed no one around them could possibly understand, and suddenly surviving the week wasn't the only thing at stake. Someone else's life was. The most dangerous man in Seoul. And a clock already running down. Kate had worked this stretch of pavement for 8 months. Not as a criminal. Not as someone with ambitions that matched the glass towers rising around her. Just a vendor, a small foldable tray, handmade bracelets, keychains she assembled in the evenings after her brother fell asleep. She charged what people were willing to pay, which was usually very little. The executives who moved through this district every evening barely registered her presence. She was furniture to them. Background noise. A girl-shaped inconvenience they stepped around on their way to places she would never go. Her name was Kate. She was 22. Her parents were gone, her father first, then her mother 4 years later, slowly, the way illness takes people when you cannot afford to stop it fast enough. After the funeral, it was just her and Jay, her 9-year-old brother, in a 2-room apartment 30 minutes from this street. Jay's medication didn't come cheap. The rent didn't care about grief. So Kate learned to wake up early, pack the tray, and find the spots where foot traffic ran high and security guards were relaxed enough not to chase her off immediately. She had learned something important in 8 months of invisibility. Wealthy people spoke freely around the poor. Not out of cruelty, mostly out of the simple assumption that someone selling $3 bracelets on a curb wasn't paying attention to anything worth hearing. Kate was always paying attention. She had seen Kim Do-han exactly twice before tonight. Both times from a distance. Both times she had simply watched, the way you watch a storm moving across the skyline. Something powerful. Something that doesn't notice you back. He was 36 years old and controlled half of Seoul's underground economy from a private office on the 31st floor of the tower directly behind her. Hotels. Casinos. Security companies. Construction contracts that moved through the city like roots beneath concrete. People who worked near him called him the silent chairman, not because he was quiet, but because when he finally spoke, the conversation was already over. He followed the same routine every single evening. Left the tower at 9:10. Entered the same black sedan at the curb. Same driver. Same security formation surrounding him like a moving wall. Arrived wherever he was going at exactly the time he said he would. Control dressed up as predictability. Kate had noticed the routine weeks ago, not because she cared about powerful men and their schedules, but because the sedan always parked in the spot closest to her usual corner. She had learned to pack up her tray before 9 o'clock to avoid the brief chaos of his exit, the security team expanding outward, the suits, the tension that crackled through the air whenever he moved. Tonight she had packed up late. And that small careless thing was about to change everything. She had been crouched behind a delivery truck at the mouth of the service alley, reorganizing her tray after a keychain clasp broke, when she heard the footsteps. 2 men. Dark suits. The kind of posture that came from years of standing between powerful people and the rest of the world. Security. She assumed they were part of Kim's team. She had seen that same cut of jacket near the tower entrance before. They stepped into the alley without looking her way. She stayed low, invisible as always, fingers working the clasp back into place. They began to speak. Not Korean. Not English. Mandarin. Most people passing through this district would have registered the sounds and moved on. Kate registered every word. 6 years in Shanghai had done that to her. 6 years following her mother through a city that wasn't theirs, absorbing the language the way children absorb things without realizing how much is being stored. She heard the first sentence and her hands went still. 9:10. Same as every night. When he opens the door, the signal goes. A pause. Then the quieter one, almost casual. Triggers already set. Under the door frame. The moment it opens fully, that's it. The other man laughed. Low. Relaxed. The laugh of someone who had already decided how the evening ended. Kate did not move. The rain tapped steadily against the concrete around her. Her bracelet tray sat tilted against the truck wheel. The broken clasp was still between her fingers. She became aware of her own breathing, too fast, too shallow, and forced herself to slow it down. She replayed the sentences one more time. When he opens the door, the signal goes. Triggers already set. Under the door frame. She hadn't misheard anything. There was a bomb in that car. And the men who had just described it were wearing the same uniforms as the men paid to keep Kim Do-han alive. 8:30 p.m., 31st floor. Kim Do-han stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his office and looked down at the city the way a man looks at something he has earned. His phone buzzed on the desk behind him. "Car ready, sir. 9:10 as scheduled." He didn't reply. He checked his watch, 8:31, and returned his gaze to the skyline. Seoul at night looked exactly the way he preferred it. Ordered. Lit. Moving according to invisible systems that most people never thought to question. He had spent 15 years building himself into one of those systems. Hotels. Casinos. Security firms. Construction contracts signed in rooms that didn't appear on any public record. Half the underground economy of this city breathed according to decisions he made. People called him the silent chairman. He had never asked for the name. But he had never corrected it either. His security chief appeared in the doorway. "Busan investors confirmed for Thursday, sir." Kim didn't look up from his briefcase. "Is that everything?" "Yes, sir." "Then you're wasting my time." The man left without another word. Good. Kim had built everything he owned by eliminating noise, unnecessary conversations, unnecessary people, unnecessary feeling. Sentiment was a crack in the foundation. He had watched other powerful men fall because they trusted too easily, loved too openly, let the wrong person stand too close for too long. He had made himself unreadable. And therefore, he had made himself untouchable. He never deviated from his routine. Every night at exactly 9:10 p.m., he walked out of this tower and into the same black sedan, flanked by the same team that had surrounded him for 3 years. Predictability was not weakness. Predictability was control. He closed his briefcase, straightened his jacket, and moved toward the door. 39 minutes until departure. He had no reason, not one, to believe tonight would be any different from the 400 evenings that had come before it. Back on the street, Kate pressed herself against the delivery truck and breathed. The two guards had finished talking. She could hear their footsteps moving back toward the street, unhurried, calm, the sound of men with a plan already in motion. She waited until the sound faded before she slowly straightened up. Her legs were unsteady. She looked at the black sedan sitting at the curb. The driver stood beside it, scrolling his phone, completely unaware. The lobby of the tower glowed behind its glass doors, warm, orderly, untouched by what she now knew. She thought about walking away. The thought lasted longer than she wanted to admit. He is not a good man, she told herself. He controls people. He hurts people. Half this city is afraid of him. This is not your problem. You have Jay to think about. You have rent and medication, and a life that barely holds together as it is. She looked down at her tray. At the bracelets she had spent 2 evenings assembling at the kitchen table while Jay slept. At the broken clasp still sitting in her palm. And then, quieter than the rain, quieter than the traffic moving on the street behind her, she heard her mother's voice. Not a memory. Something deeper than that. Doing what is right has nothing to do with whether the person deserves it. It has everything to do with who you are. Kate closed her eyes, opened them, picked up her tray, and started walking toward the driver. The clock above the tower entrance read 8:56 p.m. 14 minutes. Kate had no plan, no authority, no badge, no proof, no reason for anyone in this district to stop and listen to a street vendor with a bracelet tray. She had only one thing, the truth. And she was about to find out exactly how little that was worth. The driver's name was Park. Kate didn't know that yet. She only knew he was the one person standing closest to the car, the one person, she reasoned, who might actually care what happened to it. He was middle-aged, broad-shouldered, with the unhurried posture of someone who had done this job long enough to find it boring. He stood beside the rear door of the sedan with his phone in one hand, scrolling, unbothered by the rain. Kate approached carefully. Tray tucked under her arm. Head down. The way she always moved through this district, small, non-threatening, easy to dismiss. Just get close enough to talk to him. She stopped 2 feet away. Excuse me, sir. Park glanced up. His expression wasn't unkind, just blank. The look of someone who had not expected to be addressed and wasn't sure yet whether he wanted to be. Yes. Kate kept her voice low. Steady. She had rehearsed the words 3 times on the walkover. I need to tell you something about the car. Something is wrong with it. Someone tampered with. Tampered with it? Park's eyes dropped to her tray, then back up to her face. Something shifted in his expression, not suspicion exactly. More like the quiet, practiced dismissal of a man who had been approached by strangers on this curb before. Where did you hear that? I overheard 2 men talking in the alley. They were speaking Mandarin. They said the trigger is all ready. Move along. He turned back to his phone. Sir, please. This is a private vehicle. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The conversation, in his mind, was already finished. Whatever you heard, it has nothing to do with you. Go back to your corner. Kate stood there for 1 second longer. He didn't look up again. She stepped back. Her chest felt tight. She turned away from the car and looked at the tower entrance. Tall glass doors, a lobby full of marble and controlled light, 2 uniformed security guards visible through the glass, standing at the front desk. Try the building, she told herself. Someone inside will listen. The revolving door pushed her out before she even made it through. Not literally, but the moment she stepped toward the entrance, one of the lobby guards was already moving. He reached the door before she touched it, planting himself in the gap with the particular stillness of someone who had done this 1,000 times. No vendors inside. I'm not selling anything. Kate held up her free hand. I need to speak to someone about Mr. Kim's security. It's urgent. Ma'am. I heard something in the alley. 2 of his guards were talking about the car. There's a device under the door. Ma'am. His voice was flat and final. If you don't step back from this entrance, I will call the police. Then call them. The words came out louder than she intended. A passing businessman turned to look. The guard's eyes hardened. Kate lowered her voice immediately. Please. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I heard them say the trigger activates when he opens the door. I'm telling you, the car is rigged. The guard looked at her. Really looked at her, the wet jacket, the bracelet tray, the desperation in her face. And she could see the exact moment he made his decision. Not because he thought she was lying, but because people like her didn't carry information worth acting on. That was simply how the world was organized, and he was not the person to reorganize it tonight. Step back, he said quietly. Last time. Kate stepped back. The door closed between them. She stood on the wet pavement and pressed her hand against her sternum, as if she could slow her heartbeat from the outside. Think. The driver wouldn't listen. The building wouldn't let her in. The 2 guards from the alley were somewhere nearby. She couldn't go to them. The rest of Kim's security team moved in tight formation, and she had no way of knowing which ones were clean and which ones were not. She looked at the clock above the tower entrance. 9:01 p.m. 9 minutes. She thought about Jay again. Asleep right now. Inhaler on the nightstand. Completely unaware that his sister was standing in the rain outside a building she didn't belong in, trying to save a man who didn't know she existed. Walk away, Kate. You tried. You did more than most people would. She almost believed it. Then she saw them. The 2 guards from the alley, the ones she had overheard, had repositioned themselves near the corner of the building, close to the curb. Maybe 15 feet from the sedan. One of them had his hands clasped behind his back. The other was watching the tower entrance with the focused patience of someone waiting for a specific thing to happen. They were in place. Everything was in place. And a man upstairs was 31 floors above the ground, straightening his jacket, checking his watch, preparing to walk toward a door that would end his life the moment he reached for the handle. Kate's hands curled into fists at her sides. She thought about what her mother had left behind. Not money, not property, nothing that could be held or spent. Just a way of moving through the world. Quietly. Carefully. but without flinching when flinching was the easier option. You are not invisible because you are small, her mother used to say. You are invisible because they choose not to see you. Those are very different things. Kate looked at the tower entrance, then at the guards near the corner, then at the sedan. She set her bracelet tray down against the wall beside the entrance, gently, like she was setting something down she intended to come back for, and straightened up. One more try. Not the driver. Not the lobby. Not the people who had already decided what she was worth based on what she was carrying. Kim Do-hon himself. She just needed to get close enough. The lobby doors opened. A wave of suited figures moved through first, 4 of them, spreading outward, eyes scanning the street in both directions. Then 2 more. Then the security formation settled into place like a practiced choreography, and behind them, unhurried and completely still-faced despite the rain, Kim Do-hon stepped outside. He was taller than she had expected. She had watched him from a distance before, but distance flattened people. Up close, even from 20 feet away, there was something about the way he carried himself that made the air around him feel different. Not aggressive. Just absolute. Like a man who had not been surprised in a very long time. He moved toward the car. The driver stepped forward to open the door. Kate's heart lurched into her throat. Now. She moved. Not toward the door, toward the security line. She didn't think about it. Thinking would have stopped her. She just moved, cutting left around the outer edge of the formation, head down, fast enough to cover ground and slow enough not to trigger the guards before she was close enough for it to matter. She almost made it. 2 hands grabbed her arms simultaneously, iron hard, lifting her slightly off the ground. Stop. She twisted. 1 arm came free. That was enough. She lunged forward, cleared the last 2 feet of distance, and her hand closed around the sleeve of Kim Do-hon's jacket just as he reached the door of the car. Don't get in the car. The street went absolutely silent. 3 bodyguards moved toward her instantly. Hands reached for weapons beneath jackets. The driver froze mid-step. Somewhere behind her a radio crackled. And Kim Do-hon, the silent chairman, the most feared man in the Han River district, a man who had not been touched by a stranger in years, slowly turned his head and looked at her. His eyes were dark and completely unreadable. Rain dripped from the edge of his jaw. He did not look angry. He looked, for 1 suspended second, genuinely curious. Explain, he said. 1 word. Quiet as a held breath. And Kate realized, with her hand still wrapped around his sleeve and 3 bodyguards a foot away from removing her from the planet entirely, that this was the moment. The only moment she was going to get. 9:08 p.m. 2 minutes. Kate opened her mouth. And prayed that whatever came out next would be enough. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. That surprised her. Every other part of her body was failing, hands shaking, heart hammering, legs threatening to give way beneath her, but when she opened her mouth, the words arrived cleanly, like they had been waiting. I overheard 2 of your men talking in the alley beside the building. They were speaking Mandarin. They said the trigger activates when the door opens fully. She held his gaze. There is a bomb under the door frame of that car. Silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that precedes something irreversible. One of the bodyguards, broad, close-cropped hair, the one who had grabbed her arm, let out a short, contemptuous sound. Sir. She's a street vendor. She was trying to get past the security line. I heard them. Kate turned to face him, something sharp rising through her fear. I spent 6 years in Shanghai. I understand Mandarin. They said, when he opens the door, the signal goes. The trigger is already set under the door frame. She turned back to Kim. I tried to tell your driver. I tried to get into the building. Nobody would listen to me. Another guard stepped forward. Sir, this is clearly. Kim raised 1 hand. Just 1 hand, barely shoulder height. Everyone stopped. He was still looking at Kate. Not with warmth. There was no warmth in this man, she could see that immediately, but with something more unsettling than warmth. Attention. The full, undivided, weighing attention of someone who had spent decades reading people and deciding in seconds what they were worth. She felt it like a physical thing. Which men, he said. Not a question. An instruction. Kate turned slowly and looked toward the corner of the building. The The two guards were still there. Same position. Same careful stillness. But something had changed in the last 30 seconds. The one on the left, the one who had laughed in the alley, the relaxed one, was no longer relaxed. His jaw was set. His eyes were moving between Kate and Kim with the rapid calculation of someone running numbers they didn't like the result of. She pointed. Those two. Near the corner. They were in the alley 20 minutes ago. Several heads turned. And Kate watched, almost in slow motion, as the color left one guard's face entirely. Kim noticed. She could tell because his eyes moved there and stayed there, and something in his expression, something almost imperceptible, a slight tightening around the jaw shifted. He had seen it too. "Search the vehicle," he said quietly. Nobody moved. The stillness lasted maybe 2 seconds. Long enough to be wrong. In a functioning security team, an order from Kim Do-han would have produced instant movement, bodies converging on the car, protocol activating, everyone performing their assigned role without hesitation. Instead, 2 seconds of nothing. Because the search team, Kate realized with a cold clarity, included the traitors. Kim realized it at the same moment. She could see it, the way his eyes moved across his own men with a new and terrible assessment, like a man recalculating the weight of something he thought he knew. Then one of the accused guards ran. No warning. No escalation. He simply turned and broke into a sprint toward the far end of the street, jacket snapping in the rain, and in that single panicked movement he answered every question that had been hanging in the air. Kim's voice didn't rise. "Stop him." The street detonated into motion. Loyal guards gave chase immediately, moving with the practiced speed of men trained for exactly this kind of chaos. The second conspirator, the quieter one, the one who had spoken about the trigger so casually in the alley, made a different decision. His hand moved toward the inside of his jacket. Weapon. 2 of Kim's men were on him before the word finished echoing. The struggle was brief and brutal. 3 bodies hitting the wet pavement, a radio skidding across the concrete, one sharp crack of something connecting with something else, and then stillness. The guard face down. Arms pinned. A gun skittered to the gutter. More security had poured from the building lobby now. Radios everywhere. Someone was already on a phone. Terse, rapid, professional. The sedan sat untouched at the curb, suddenly the most dangerous object on the street, a perimeter forming around it as if by instinct. Kate had not moved. She stood exactly where she had grabbed Kim's sleeve, her bracelet tray abandoned against the wall behind her, rain soaking through her jacket, watching the controlled chaos unfold around her like a woman who had stepped into a film and couldn't quite locate the exit. A hand touched her elbow, not rough, just firm. One of Kim's men. Not one of the conspirators. His face was unreadable, but his voice was almost careful. "Step back from the vehicle, please." She stepped back. Kim had moved away from the car the moment the running guard broke. Now he stood 10 feet from the sedan, watching his own team work with an expression Kate could not fully read. Not fear, she was certain of that. She wasn't sure this man experienced fear in the way other people did. Something more controlled than fear. An internal recalibration happening behind perfectly still eyes. A specialist arrived from somewhere Kate hadn't seen. Compact bag, dark jacket, moving toward the car with the deliberate, unhurried pace of someone who needed their hands to stay steady. 2 guards flanked him. Nobody spoke. Kate watched the specialist crouch beside the driver's side door. She watched him reach beneath the door frame. She watched him go very still. Then he stood up slowly and turned toward Kim. His voice was flat and professional, the voice of someone delivering information and not opinion. "Sir. Device confirmed. Pressure trigger mechanism, wired to the door. Full detonation upon complete opening of the driver's side door." A pause. "If you had entered the vehicle normally." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The silence that followed was a different quality from all the silences that had come before it. Not tense. Not suspended. Just heavy. The weight of something that almost happened pressing down on the wet street and everyone standing on it. Kim stood with his hands clasped behind his back and looked at the car for a long moment. Then he turned and looked at Kate. She had been watching him. She hadn't meant to. It felt dangerously close to staring, and staring at this man under normal circumstances was probably inadvisable, but she couldn't look away. She needed to see it. Needed to see the moment the information landed on a man like him, the moment the untouchable silent chairman understood that he had been 20 seconds and one car door away from ceasing to exist. His expression didn't collapse. It didn't need to. But something moved through it, something beneath the surface, quiet and seismic, and for one unguarded moment Kate saw it. Not fear. Not even shock. Something older than both of those things. The particular devastation of betrayal. These were his men. People he had chosen. Trusted with his routine, his schedule, his life. And they had used every piece of that trust to build something designed to end him. He looked at Kate. For the first time since she had grabbed his sleeve, she felt the full weight of his attention settle on her without the noise of everything else around it. "You saved my life," he said. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't loud. He said it the way he said everything, quietly, with the gravity of a man who only spoke when words were necessary, and chose them accordingly. Kate blinked. The rain was still falling. Somewhere down the street the sound of a scuffle, a shouted command, a car door slamming. The city continuing its indifferent motion around the small extraordinary thing that had just happened on this curb. She stopped. Swallowed. Started again. I didn't want someone to die. Kim studied her face for another moment. Then he looked away, back toward the building, toward his security team moving with new urgency, toward the sedan that would need to be taken apart piece by piece before anyone went near it again. "Get her a blanket," he said to no one in particular. "And keep her here." A junior guard appeared beside Kate almost immediately, a foil emergency blanket unfolding in his hands, and she accepted it without quite processing what she was doing. She wrapped it around her shoulders and stood in the rain and looked at the car she had stopped the most dangerous man in Seoul from entering. Her hands, she noticed, had finally stopped shaking. It was over. The plot. The countdown. The 14 minutes that had felt like the longest of her life. But Kate didn't know yet, standing there in her foil blanket on the wet pavement, surrounded by men with radios and weapons and urgent voices, that the real thing was only just beginning. Because somewhere in the controlled chaos of the next few minutes, Kim Do-han would make a decision. And that decision would change both of their lives in ways neither of them could have predicted standing on opposite sides of a car door on a rainy Tuesday night. The street looked like a different place at 9:23 p.m. 13 minutes had passed since Kate grabbed Kim's sleeve. 13 minutes since the world on this curb had rearranged itself into something none of the people standing on it would easily forget. Police vehicles had arrived, 3 of them, parked at angles that blocked both ends of the street, blue light strobing across the wet pavement in slow, indifferent sweeps. Plain-clothed officers moved between uniformed ones. Radios overlapped. The sedan sat surrounded by yellow tape now, sealed off, waiting for the bomb disposal team that was already on its way. The 2 traitors had been separated. The one who had run, caught half a block away, face down on the pavement before he made it to the corner, was being held in the back of a police vehicle, wrists bound, expression hollow. The fight had gone out of him the moment Kim's men reached him. Some people, Kate had noticed, looked smaller once they were caught. Like the plan had been holding them upright, and without it there was nothing left to stand on. The second one, the quieter one, the one whose hand had gone for the weapon, had said nothing since he was restrained. He sat against the wall of the building with his hands zip-tied behind him and his eyes fixed on a point somewhere in the middle distance, as if he had already left the street in his mind and gone somewhere else entirely. Kate watched them from across the cordon, blanket still around her shoulders, and felt something she hadn't expected. Not satisfaction. Not relief. Just a profound and exhausting sadness. These were men who had stood beside Kim Do-han every day. Learned his schedule. Memorized his habits. Watched his face in 1,000 ordinary moments, elevator doors opening, phones buzzing, coffee going cold on a desk. And all of it had been architecture. Every day of apparent loyalty building toward one specific door opening at one specific time. She thought about how long that kind of plan must take. How patient you had to be. How hollow. Kim stood apart from all of it. That was the first thing she noticed about him in the aftermath. The way he created distance without moving. His senior men orbited him, approaching with information and retreating with instructions, but the space immediately around him remained untouched. He listened. He spoke in short sentences. He gave no visible indication of what was happening inside him. But Kate was good at watching people. 8 months of invisibility had made her fluent in the things people's bodies said when their mouths were saying something else. the slight tension across Kim's shoulders that hadn't been there before. The way his eyes moved across his remaining security team with a new and careful measurement, like a man repricing everything in a room he thought he knew the value of. He was shaken. Not broken. She doubted this man broke in any conventional sense, but shaken. The way a structure is shaken. Still standing, still functional, but newly aware of its own foundations in a way it hadn't been an hour ago. His most senior officer approached him, a man in his 40s, sharp-faced, who moved with the authority of someone second in command for a long time. He stopped beside Kim and spoke in a low voice. Kate was too far away to hear the words, but she saw Kim's jaw tighten. And she saw the senior officer look briefly, involuntarily, toward the two restrained guards against the wall. 20 minutes later, she learned why. One of the junior officers, young, slightly awkward, clearly assigned to manage Kate because nobody more senior wanted the job, crouched beside her where she was sitting on the building's front step and offered her a cup of something hot from a thermos. She accepted it. He stayed crouched a moment longer than necessary, and she could tell he wanted to say something. The two guards, he started, then stopped, looked around, continued more quietly. They weren't freelancers. They were placed. Someone recruited them specifically, from inside the syndicate. Kate looked at him over the rim of the cup. Someone sent them? He nodded, then seemed to remember himself, straightened up, and walked away without adding anything else. Kate sat with that for a moment. Not random. Not opportunistic. Orchestrated. Someone, a rival, a competitor, someone who wanted what Kim Do-han had built, had been patient enough and connected enough to reach inside his innermost circle and turn two of his own men against him. Had learned his routine. Had acquired the device. Had placed it. Had waited. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was a statement. Your walls are not as solid as you think. Your trust is a vulnerability. You are not untouchable. Kate stared at the sealed sedan and felt the weight of what she had stumbled into settle more fully on her shoulders. This was not a street crime. This was war between powers she had no name for, playing out in a language she had only partially overheard. And she was sitting in the middle of it, wrapped in a foil blanket. Mississippi. She looked up. Kim Do-han's senior officer was standing in front of her. Up close he had the kind of face that gave nothing away voluntarily, but had been giving things away for so long the effort showed around the eyes. Mr. Kim would like to speak with you. Kate stood. The blanket slipped from one shoulder and she caught it. She followed him across the cordon street, past the police vehicles and the radios and the controlled, organized aftermath of something that had almost been catastrophic. Kim stood near the building's side entrance, away from the sedan, away from the officers, away from most of the noise. He had his back partially to the street. When he heard her approach, he turned. His expression had settled into something unreadable again. The brief, unguarded moment she had witnessed earlier, the one where she had seen the devastation of betrayal move through him like a current, was gone. Contained. Returned to wherever he kept things he didn't intend to show. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. Kate waited. She was learning that with this man, waiting was the correct response. "How much did you hear?" he said finally. "Enough." She kept her voice level. "They said 9:10. They said the signal goes when the door opens. They said the trigger was already set under the door frame." She paused. "They said no one would suspect the security team." Something crossed Kim's face at that last sentence. "They were right," he said quietly. "No one did." The admission cost him something. She could hear it, not in any dramatic way, but in the careful stillness with which he delivered it. A man who prided himself on seeing everything, acknowledging that he had been comprehensively blind. "How long have you worked this street?" he asked. The shift in direction surprised her. 8 months. "You noticed my routine." It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. "Still," she answered carefully. "Hard not to. The car parks close to my usual spot." He nodded slowly. His eyes moved briefly to where her bracelet tray still sat against the wall near the entrance, abandoned in the chaos, a handful of keychains scattered on the wet ground beside it. "You tried to warn the driver first," he said. Kate blinked. "How did you?" "Park told me. After." A pause. "He thought you were a scammer." "I know. You tried the building after that." They threatened to call the police. And then you came through the security line anyway. She looked at him steadily. I was running out of options. For the first time since she had met him, if this could be called meeting, something shifted at the very corner of Kim Do-hoon's mouth. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one, maybe. There and gone. Most people, he said, would have walked away after the driver. Kate thought about Jay. About her mother's voice in the rain. About the moment she had set her bracelet tray against the wall and straightened up and decided. Most people probably should have, she said. Kim looked at her for another long moment. Then he looked at the sealed sedan. The yellow tape. The bomb disposal team now working methodically around the vehicle with the focused quiet of people who needed to be precise. His empire. His routine. His men. All of it compromised. And the only reason he was standing here to reckon with that, the only reason he was standing anywhere at all, was a 22-year-old street vendor who spoke Mandarin and refused to walk away. His voice, when he spoke again, was very quiet. The people who arranged this, he said, they wanted my empire. He paused. They came close. Kate said nothing. She wasn't sure what response existed for a sentence like that. They will try again, he continued. Not with fear. With the flat certainty of a man who understood the world he lived in and had never pretended otherwise. Different method. Different people. But they will try again. He turned back to her. Which means, he said, that tonight changes things. For me. For the people around me. For the way I build trust going forward. Kate nodded slowly, not entirely sure where this was going. It also, Kim said, creates a debt. The word landed with a particular weight. Not dramatic, he wasn't a dramatic man. But deliberate. Chosen. Kate looked at him carefully. You don't owe me anything. You saved my life. I just listened. And then I didn't walk away. Yes, Kim said. You did. He looked at her with that same quiet, measuring attention. Do you understand how many people would have walked away? She didn't answer. Because honestly, standing there in the rain, thinking about the driver and the lobby guard and the 14 minutes and everything that had almost gone differently, she was beginning to. By 10:15 p.m., the police had taken the traitors away. The bomb disposal team had neutralized the device and removed it from the vehicle. The street was quieter now. The blue lights were gone. Rain fell steadily on empty pavement and yellow tape and the ordinary unremarkable curb where the most dangerous man in Seoul had almost died. Kate sat in the back of a security van with a blanket around her shoulders and a cup of cold tea in her hands. She thought about Jay. About whether she had enough for his medication this week. About her bracelet tray still sitting against the wall, and whether anyone had knocked it over in all the chaos. Small thoughts. The kind the mind reaches for after something large. She didn't hear Kim Do-hoon approach. She only knew he was there when the van shifted slightly under his weight as he sat down beside her. And she understood, with a clarity that had nothing to do with Mandarin or bombs or rainy Tuesday nights, that whatever came next was going to be something she had no category for. Not yet. He sat beside her without preamble. No announcement. No aid introducing him. No adjustment period offered. Kim Do-hoon simply opened the van door, settled onto the bench across from her, and looked at her the way he had been looking at her all evening, with that complete, undecorated attention that felt less like kindness and more like honesty. Kate straightened instinctively, then stopped herself. She was tired. Her jacket was still damp. Her feet ached from 8 hours on the pavement and one very eventful 9 minutes of running through a security cordon. She didn't have the energy to perform composure for a man who had already seen her shaking. She stayed as she was. He seemed to appreciate that, though she couldn't have said exactly why. For a moment neither of them spoke. Outside the van the street continued its quiet recovery, a few remaining officers, the low murmur of radios, the sound of a vehicle pulling away. The rain had softened to something barely there, more mist than rain now, blurring the street lights into long pale smears against the dark. Your name, Kim said. You told my men Kate. Yes. Just Kate. Kate Mensah. He repeated it once, quietly, as if filing it somewhere specific. Then, you are not Korean. No. My mother was Ghanaian. My father was Korean. She paused. I grew up here mostly. And in Shanghai for a while. When my mother was still, she stopped. When she was alive. Kim absorbed this without comment. He had a particular quality, she was noticing, of receiving information without reacting to it visibly. Most people filled silence with something, a sound, a nod, a sympathetic expression. Kim simply listened, and the listening itself felt substantial. Shanghai, he said. That is where you learned Mandarin. My mother worked there for 6 years. I went with her. I was 10 when we arrived. Kate looked down at the cup in her hands. She said learning the language properly was the only respectful way to live somewhere. So we did. She sounds, Kim said carefully, like a woman of principle. Something tightened briefly in Kate's chest. She was. Silence again. But a different quality of silence from before. Less formal. Less weighted by everything that had just happened on the street outside. Kim looked at his hands for a moment. Then back at her. Tell me about your life, he said. Not tonight. Before tonight. Kate looked at him. The question was unexpected, not because it was strange for someone to ask, but because it was strange for him to ask. This was a man who, by every observable measure, processed people as variables. Assets or liabilities. Useful or irrelevant. Personal history was not, she would have assumed, a category he collected. But he was waiting. And there was nothing performative about it. So she told him. She kept it spare. She wasn't a person who decorated her own pain. Her father had left when she was 4, not dramatically, just incrementally, the way some people leave, until one day the incrementing was complete and he was simply gone. Her mother had raised her and later Jay alone, working administrative jobs, moving between cities when work required it. Shanghai had been the longest stretch of stability they had known, 6 years in one place, one school, one language slowly becoming familiar. Then her mother got sick. They came back to Seoul because that was where the family was, where the support network existed, where Jay could be looked after while Kate figured out what came next. The support network turned out to be thinner than anticipated. The figuring out took longer than expected. Their mother died 14 months after the diagnosis, not slowly enough for anyone to fully prepare, not quickly enough for anyone to be spared the watching. After that it was just Kate and Jay. She was 18. He was 5. She told Kim about the bracelet tray, how she had started making them because the materials were cheap and the margins were better than most things she could do without qualifications. How she had learned which corners were worth standing on and which security guards would move her along and which ones would look the other way if she stayed small and quiet and caused no trouble. How she calculated each week's budget around Jay's medication and the rent and whatever remained after that, which was usually not much. She told him all of this in the same flat, practical tone she used to think about it herself. Not asking for anything. Not performing suffering. Just answering the question he had asked. When she finished, the van was quiet for a moment. Kim had not moved while she spoke. Had not shifted or looked away or offered the small consoling sounds that people sometimes offered when they didn't know what else to give. He had simply listened with that same focused filing quality, as if every detail mattered and was being placed precisely. Now he was quiet. Kate waited. Outside, someone called out to someone else in a low professional voice. A door closed. The mist continued doing what mist did, filling in the spaces between things, making the edges soft. Your brother, Kim said finally. What is his name? Jay. She paused. He is 9. And his condition? Asthma. Mostly managed. But the medication it adds up. She said it without embarrassment. It was simply a fact. Some weeks are tighter than others. Kim nodded once. Then he was quiet again for long enough that Kate began to wonder if the conversation was over, if he had gathered what he needed and would now stand up and return to the world outside, the world of radios and security teams and the enormous complicated aftermath of betrayal, and she would find her own way home across the city with her bracelet tray and whatever remained of this strange evening. He didn't stand up. I built this empire, Kim said, by trusting no one. His voice was different now. Not softer exactly, softness didn't seem to be in his register. But quieter. Less sealed. Every decision I made alone. Every person I brought close, I vetted until there was nothing left to vet. He paused. And still they got inside. Kate said nothing. She understood he wasn't asking for a response yet. The men tonight, they were with me for 3 years. 3 years. He said the number with a particular stillness, the way you say something you are still in the process of believing. I knew their schedules. Their families. I had reviewed their files more than once. Another pause. And someone reached them anyway. He looked at the floor of the van. I have been thinking, he said, about what it means that the person who saw what they were, the person who heard what they said and understood it and acted on it, was someone I had never once looked at. Kate felt something shift quietly in the air between them. I walk past this building every night at 9:10, Kim continued. Every night for 2 years. And I did not know you existed. Most people don't, Kate said. That's not unusual. No, he said. It is not. He looked at her. But it should be. She didn't know what to do with that. So she said nothing. Kim sat forward slightly, elbows on knees, hands loosely clasped, looking at the middle distance in the way of a man working something out in real time. You tried to warn my driver, he said. He dismissed you. You tried the building. They threatened you with police. You had every reason to conclude that no one was going to listen and walk away. He paused. Instead you ran through my security line and grabbed my arm. Yes. Why? The question was direct and genuine. Not rhetorical. He actually wanted to know. Kate thought about her mother. About the voice in the rain. About the bracelet tray she had set against the wall like something she intended to come back for. Because I didn't want to be the person who knew and did nothing, she said. Whatever happens after, whether you believe me or not, whether it works or not, I didn't want that to be the kind of person I am. Kim looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded. Once. Slowly. As if something had been confirmed that he had suspected but needed to hear stated plainly. From today, he said, you will not sell bracelets on that street again. Kate blinked. I'm sorry. Your brother will receive proper medical care. You will have a safe apartment, not here in the district, somewhere quieter, somewhere suitable. Education, if you want it. Stability. He said each thing with the same flat deliberateness with which he had said everything else, not as an offer exactly. More as a statement of what was going to happen. This will be arranged. Kate stared at him. Part of her, the part that had spent 4 years calculating margins and medication costs and whether the electricity bill could wait another week, felt the pull of it immediately. The exhausting arithmetic of survival suddenly lifted. Jay sleeping soundly in a warm apartment without Kate lying awake running numbers in the dark. But another part of her, older, more careful, the part her mother had shaped, resisted. I don't want charity, she said quietly. Kim looked at her without offense. This is not charity, he said. Then what is it? He held her gaze with complete steadiness. Tonight you stood between me and my own death. You were dismissed, threatened, and ignored. And you acted anyway. He paused. That creates something. Not sentiment. Not pity. His voice dropped slightly, not with emotion, but with the weight of a man who chose his words the way other men chose weapons. A debt. The words settled in the air of the van like something solid. Kate felt it. I don't need. What you need, Kim said, is not the question I am answering. He sat back slightly. The question I am answering is what I owe. And I owe you your life back. The life you should have been living instead of calculating whether you can afford your brother's medication. Kate's throat tightened unexpectedly. She hadn't cried once tonight. Not during the 14 minutes, not during the confrontation, not during any of the chaos that followed. She had been too busy moving, thinking, surviving. But something about the precision of what he had just said, the life you should have been living, reached somewhere unguarded and pressed. She looked away. Toward the misted window of the van. The smeared street lights. The ordinary dark of a Tuesday night in Seoul that had turned out to be anything but. I always repay my debts, Kim said quietly. Without exception. Without condition. She turned back to look at him. His expression was exactly what it had been all evening, measured, contained, giving nothing away that wasn't intentional. But his eyes held something she hadn't seen in them before. Not gratitude exactly. Something more complicated than gratitude. The specific expression, she thought, of a man confronting an uncomfortable truth about himself and choosing not to look away from it. He had built an empire on the premise that people were tools. And tonight a tool he had never bothered to notice had saved his life. Kate held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked down at the cold cup of tea in her hands. "My brother's name is Jay," she said quietly. "He has his inhaler on his nightstand. He is probably wondering where I am." Kim stood. "Then we will make sure you get home." He moved toward the van door. Paused with his hand on the frame. Didn't turn fully, just enough that she could hear him clearly. "This is not the end of this conversation, Kate Mensah." She looked up. "It is," he said, "the beginning of an arrangement." He stepped out into the mist. Kate sat alone in the van for another moment. She looked at the bracelet tray through the small window, still propped against the wall near the building entrance, slightly tilted, a few keychains on the wet ground beside it. She had told herself she intended to come back for it. But sitting there in the quiet aftermath of the strangest night of her life, she understood, with the same bone-deep certainty with which she had understood the Mandarin in the alley, that the person who came back for that tray tomorrow morning would not be quite the same person who had set it down. Something had shifted. She wasn't sure yet what it meant. She wasn't sure yet whether to be relieved or afraid. She suspected, knowing what little she knew of Kim Do-han, that it might turn out to be both. 3 weeks passed. The city moved the way cities do, indifferent, continuous, unbothered by the private earthquakes happening inside the lives of the people moving through it. Buses ran their routes. Office towers filled and emptied. The Han River Financial District returned to its ordinary Tuesday rhythm as if nothing had ever interrupted it. The bracelet tray was gone from the wall. Kate had gone back for it the morning after, partly out of habit, partly because she wasn't yet ready to accept that a single night could restructure everything. She had found it where she left it, slightly damp, 3 keychains missing, the broken clasp still sitting on the tray's edge where she had set it when she heard the footsteps. She had picked it up, carried it home, and not gone back to the district since. The apartment came first. Not the district, somewhere quieter, as Kim had said. A clean 2-bedroom in a residential neighborhood 40 minutes from the Han River, on the 4th floor of a building with an elevator that worked and an entrance that locked properly. It had large windows and wooden floors and a kitchen that was twice the size of the one they had left behind. Jay had walked through every room twice on the first day, touching things with the careful deliberateness of a child making sure something was real. He had asked Kate once, very seriously, whether they were in trouble. She had told him no. He had accepted this and gone to find the best window for watching the street below, which was, in his assessment, the one in the smaller bedroom that faced the intersection. He claimed it immediately. Kate let him. She stood in the larger bedroom that evening, looking at walls that belonged to no memory yet, and tried to locate what she was feeling. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was something quieter and more complicated, the particular disorientation of a person who has been braced against difficulty for so long that the absence of difficulty doesn't feel like relief. It feels like waiting for the difficulty to return. She gave herself a week to adjust. Then she started paying attention to the other things Kim had arranged. Jay's medical care was the one she felt most immediately. A specialist, not a hospital waiting room, not a clinic with a 3-week intake process, but a specialist, in an actual private practice with a receptionist who knew Jay's name by the second visit. The doctor reviewed his history with a thoroughness that made Kate realize, quietly and without drama, how inadequate the previous care had been. Not through anyone's fault, just through the ordinary calculus of what was affordable on a street vendor's income. New medication. A proper management plan. Follow-up appointments already scheduled. Jay, characteristically, was most interested in whether the doctor had any good stickers. She did. He approved. Kate sat in the waiting room during that first appointment and stared at the wall and breathed in a way she hadn't breathed in a very long time, fully, without the low-grade tension that had lived in her chest for 4 years like a permanent resident. She thought about her mother. About how much simpler things might have been, in the end, if simpler had ever been an option. She didn't cry. But it was close. The education piece came more slowly. Kim's people, a quietly efficient woman named Director Song who communicated primarily through brief precise emails, had sent Kate a list of options. University enrollment for the coming semester. Vocational programs. Language certifications. Professional development courses in business administration, finance, logistics. Kate had read the list 3 times. Then she had sat with it for 5 days without responding. Not because she didn't want it. She did, more than she had allowed herself to admit in years, because wanting things you cannot afford is its own particular kind of exhaustion, and she had learned early to manage it by not wanting them too loudly. Education had been the thing she had set aside most deliberately after her mother died. The thing she had told herself she would return to one day when circumstances allowed. Circumstances had never allowed. Now they did suddenly, without the gradual preparation she had always imagined would accompany this moment. On the 6th day she emailed Director Song back. Business administration, she wrote. And Mandarin literature, if that is possible alongside it. I want to understand the language properly. Not just speak it. Director Song replied within the hour. Both arranged. Enrollment confirmed for next semester. Materials will be delivered to your address within the week. Kate read the email twice. Then she closed her laptop and went to help Jay with his homework. She saw Kim for the first time since the van on a Thursday evening, 4 weeks after the night on the street. It wasn't planned, or at least, she hadn't planned it. A message had come through Director Song the previous day. Mr. Kim will be in the Mapo district tomorrow evening. He has suggested a brief meeting if you are available. No obligation. Kate had stared at the phrase no obligation for a moment, finding it slightly incongruous in the context of a man who had spent 36 years in an industry built entirely on obligation. She replied that she was available. The restaurant was not what she expected. She had braced for something that would make her feel small, somewhere that would remind her, through sheer grandeur, of the distance between her life and his. Instead it was a quiet place. Small, wooden interior, the kind of restaurant that didn't advertise itself because its clientele didn't need it to. 8 tables. 1 security man visible near the door, which probably meant 2 more she couldn't see. Kim was already there when she arrived. He stood when she entered, which surprised her, and waited until she was seated before sitting himself. He had exchanged the black suit for something slightly less formal. Still dark, still precise, but with the quality of a man who had come somewhere he considered neutral ground. He looked, she thought, slightly tired. Not visibly, not in any way that most people would have caught. But she had spent an entire extraordinary evening watching his face, and she had developed a rudimentary fluency in what it did when something was costing him. Something was costing him. You look well, he said. The apartment helps, she said. Thank you. He nodded. And your brother? Jay is good. The new doctor found 2 things the previous one had missed. His breathing is already better. She paused. He wanted me to ask if you like stickers. Something happened to Kim's expression that she was fairly certain had never happened to it in a professional context before. Stickers, he repeated. He gives them to people he approves of. It's his system. She kept her face straight. I told him I wasn't sure the question was appropriate. He told me that was a very boring answer. Kim looked at her for a moment. Then quietly, briefly, in a way that suggested it was something his face did rarely and without much warning, he smiled. Not the ghost of one this time. An actual smile. Small, controlled, but real. Tell him, Kim said, that I am open to the evaluation. They ate simply and talked for an hour. Not about the night on the street, not directly. That subject existed between them the way a shared experience always does between 2 people who live through something together, present, acknowledged, not requiring constant reference. Instead Kim asked about her enrollment. About Jay's school. About what she was finding difficult and what was easier than expected. He asked these questions with the same quality of attention he brought to everything, as if the answers genuinely mattered, as if he was filing them somewhere with care. Kate answered honestly. The enrollment was overwhelming and exciting in roughly equal measure. The apartment still felt borrowed. Jay had made 2 friends already and was navigating this with considerably more grace than she was. She asked him carefully how things were within his organization. He was quiet for a moment. Rebuilding, he said. Carefully. He set down his glass. What happened 3 weeks ago exposed something I had been unwilling to examine. The size of the circle I trusted. The way I had structured loyalty, or failed to. He paused. I am making it smaller. More deliberate. Is that harder? Smaller. It is more honest, he said. Which is harder, yes. But sustainable in a way that size alone never was. Kate nodded slowly. My mother used to say that the people who betray you can only get close if you let closeness become automatic. If you stop being intentional about it. Kim looked at her. Your mother, he said quietly, appears in a great deal of what you say. She earned it, Kate said simply. He absorbed this. Then, after a moment, mine did not. He said it without self-pity, just as a fact, delivered in the same flat register as everything else. But Kate heard the weight beneath it. The long complicated history that a sentence like that contained. The way it explained partially, a man who had built his entire world on the premise that trust was a liability. She didn't push. Some doors you leave for people to open in their own time. They finished dinner. Kim walked with her to the door, two security men materializing from somewhere to flank him at a respectful distance, and paused at the entrance. The enrollment materials, he said. Director Song mentioned you requested Mandarin literature alongside business. Yes. Why literature specifically? Kate thought about it. Because I want to understand how people think in a language. Not just what they're saying. How they're saying it. What they consider worth writing down. She paused. The men in the alley, I understood their words. But I've been thinking since that night about what kind of people say those things so casually. What kind of world produces that kind of casual? She looked at him. I think literature gets closer to that than grammar does. Kim studied her face. You are, he said, not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone frightened, he said. Someone grateful in a way that made them easy to manage. Kate raised an eyebrow. And instead. The corner of his mouth moved. Someone inconvenient, he said. In the best possible sense. Months passed. The semester began. Kate learned, for the first time in years, what it felt like to sit in a room specifically designed for the purpose of thinking. To read something not because it was useful, but because it was true. To write arguments and have them challenged and sharpened and return to her better than they had left. She was good at it. This didn't surprise her exactly. She had always known, in the quiet way you know things about yourself that circumstances have never had room for, that she was capable of more than the bracelet tray required. But knowing it abstractly and experiencing it concretely were different things, and the difference was significant. Jay noticed. You come home differently now, he told her one evening, not looking up from his homework. Differently how? He considered this with the gravity of a 9-year-old working out how to say something true. Like you're still thinking. Before, you came home like you were done thinking. Kate looked at her brother for a long moment. When did you get so observant? She asked. He shrugged. I learned from you. She visited Kim occasionally. Not frequently, perhaps once every 3 weeks, sometimes less. It was never social exactly, and never purely formal. Something in between. He would ask about her studies. She would ask about the rebuilding. They would talk around the edges of things and occasionally through them, and she was never quite sure which of them had initiated the habit or when it had become one. But she noticed things changing in him. Slowly. Not dramatically. This was not a man who changed dramatically, she suspected, in any direction. But in the careful incremental way that real change happens, beneath the surface, in the foundations. He began asking questions he wouldn't have asked before. Not about operations or strategy, those conversations he had with other people. He asked her about ethics. About what her mother had meant by doing right regardless of desert. About whether she believed people were fundamentally capable of change or whether character was fixed early and the rest was performance. She answered him honestly every time. Sometimes he agreed. Sometimes he pushed back with the particular precision of a man who had thought about everything and was not interested in easy conclusions. Once they argued for 40 minutes about whether loyalty could be genuine if it was also paid for, and Kate left the conversation feeling more awake than she had in weeks. She told Jay about it on the way home. He listened seriously. Then, who won? Neither of us, Kate said. I think that was the point. Jay considered this. That sounds exhausting. It was, she said. It was also excellent. The night she understood that something had fundamentally shifted was an ordinary evening 6 months after the street. She was leaving the university library, late, the campus quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists in the hour before midnight when the buildings exhale, and her phone buzzed. Kim. Not director Song. Not one of his aides. Kim himself, directly, which in 6 months had happened exactly twice before. The car I showed you last month. The one from the charity logistics project. The distribution route through the Mapo district. Your suggestion has been implemented. It works. I wanted you to know. Kate stood on the library steps in the cool evening air and read the message twice. It was not a large thing. A logistics route for a charitable distribution project, one of the newer, quieter arms of Kim's organization, the kind of thing he had begun building in the months since the night on the street. She had mentioned, in passing, during one of their conversations, that the route being used bypassed 3 neighborhoods with the highest density of elderly residents living alone. He had listened. And then months later, quietly, without fanfare, he had changed it. Kate typed back, "Good. The Mapo district will notice, even if they don't know why." His reply came quickly for a man who rarely replied quickly. "That is the point." She put her phone in her pocket and walked home through the quiet campus, and somewhere in the space between the library steps and the gate she understood, not with surprise, but with a particular clarity of something you have been watching arrive for a long time, that Kim Do-han was not the same man who had reached for that car door 6 months ago. Not entirely. Not completely reformed, she was not naive, and he would never have claimed it. The empire was still the empire. The industry was still the industry. There were rooms in his world she would never enter and decisions made there she would never be told about, and she had made her own careful peace with that. But something in him had opened. A window, not a door. Small. Deliberate. But real. And she thought, walking home through the cool night air to the apartment where Jay was asleep with his inhaler on the nightstand and his school bag by the door, that this was perhaps what her mother had meant. Not that doing right transforms the person you do it for, but that it always, without exception, transforms you. 6 months after the night on the street, Kim stood beside a black car. Not the same one, that car had been taken apart piece by piece and would never run again. A different car. Same position at the curb outside the tower, same hour, same rain, because Seoul in autumn was generous with its rain, and the city had a way of rhyming with itself. Kate stood beside him. She wasn't sure afterward how that had happened exactly. She had been passing through the district on her way back from a study group, had texted to say so, and he had replied with 2 words, "Come up." And now here they were on the curb, looking at the city that moved around them with its usual magnificent indifference. Kim looked at the car for a long moment. Then at the curb where the sedan had been. Then at the street, rain-slicked and lit, exactly as it had been the first time. "The last time I stood here," he said, "I almost died." Kate looked at the same spot. "And the last time I stood here," she said, "I almost got arrested." He turned to look at her. And then, not the ghost of one, not the small controlled barely there version, Kim Do-han laughed. A real one. Brief, quiet, genuine. The laugh of a man who had not laughed easily in a long time and was slightly surprised to find himself doing it now. It transformed his face completely. Kate stored it away somewhere careful. The rain fell softly between the street lights. Somewhere in the city Jay was at home, breathing easily, homework done, window claimed, completely unaware that his sister was standing on the curb where everything had changed. Kim looked at her, and his expression settled back into its customary stillness, but warmer now. Changed. The face of a man who had allowed something in. "The night you stopped me from opening that door," he said quietly, "you did not just save my life." Kate waited. "You changed it," he said. "Both of ours." She looked at the street. At the tower. At the ordinary, extraordinary city moving around them in the rain. "I just listened," she said. "And then I didn't walk away." Kim was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you understand yet how rare that is?" She thought about the driver. The lobby guard. The 14 minutes. The bracelet tray propped against the wall like something she intended to come back for. She thought about her mother's voice in the rain. "I'm starting to," she said. The city moved around them. The rain continued falling. And neither of them walked away. Some debts are paid in money. Some in loyalty. Some in the slow, quiet, difficult work of becoming someone better than you were. Kim Do-han had built his empire on the first 2. Kate Mensa had shown him the 3rd. And in the end, standing on the same wet curb where an invisible girl had once grabbed the sleeve of the most dangerous man in Seoul, that turned out to be worth considerably more than either of them had expected.